and welcome. Thank you all so much for joining. This is our second monthly Perfeqta webinar. We're going to continue to do these monthly, and I'll just start with talking about the purpose of why we want to have, this safe space, these conversations with you all. We know that the world is becoming more complex. It is changing how we work, how we think about work, how we approach work. And I'll talk a little bit more in just a few moments about the work that we do at Perfeqta, but we wanted to make sure that we had, a regular conversation with those of you that are working in your respective roles at your companies, whether you are driving HR, talent, culture, diversity, equity, and inclusion, even perhaps leading an ERG, or maybe you're just simply really passionate about this work. Let me tell you that you're in the right place. We're going to continue to host these conversations because we know that things are rapidly changing. The expectations that your leadership teams are putting on you are changing, as well as the needs of your employees. And so each month, we're going to be bringing to you a topic that is extremely relevant to the times that we're in. And then today's topic is about driving DE&I outcomes with limited resources. We are seeing what's going on in the market right now, what's going on in the economy right now. We're seeing that budgets are being cut, there's layoffs happening, there's hiring freezes, just given that we are now in this recession. And so companies are cutting these budgets, but the expectations simply aren't changing, right? How do you continue to curate a healthy workplace culture when there are so many changes, when there are so many concerns and uncertainties and employee demands and talent needs? That is why we're here with you today. We're here with you today so that we can have a really rich and engaging conversation on what do we even do when the resources are limited, but the expectations are not. So continue to say hello in the chat. Let us know where you're joining from. Would love to also know what company you're with as well. So I know there's about almost 40 of us here in the Zoom room together. So don't be shy. I am in Atlanta, Georgia, originally from North Carolina. I'm also joined here by my colleagues, Tamara and Bryce. They will be introducing themselves in just a second. It looks like we have some more folks in Atlanta. Hey, Redfin. Redfin is one of our partners at Perfeqta. We're in from Orlando. Awesome. I just got back from Orlando this morning, actually. Then we have South Carolina in the house, New York, Texas, Brooklyn, Richmond, Maryland. Y'all keep saying hey in the chat and show us some love. And also make sure that you're showing us love throughout. There is a Q&A function in Zoom, so if you have any questions, feel free to ask those questions. There will be time at the end for Q&A. But in the meantime, say hello in the chat. If something is resonating, if you have an experience that you want to share, definitely let us know that. We do have some poll questions. So during our time together, we want to make sure that we are not just talking to you, but we're talking with you. We want to make sure that we are having an actual conversation. There's also some really, really, really phenomenal people here in the Zoom room. So make sure y'all are connecting and sharing resources with one another as well, because this is really about community and building community. With that being said, I am excited to just introduce myself if I haven't had the pleasure of meeting you all, and then I'll turn it over to our team. So my name is Letitia Bird. I am the CEO of Perfeqta. Perfeqta is short for Performance, Equity, and Talent. And our mission is to help build high-performing teams and put equity back into talent. We essentially work in the business of culture transformation. So our work is not done until the most marginalized employee at an organization feels safe. We do this through a number of ways, through diversity consulting, so helping our client partners launch diversity strategic roadmaps, launching diversity steering councils and committees. We have worked with tons of ERGs across various industries and companies. And we also have, I'm like, let me look at my notes before I start rambling, saying we do stuff that we don't even do. But we've done a lot of work with ERGs. We have been excited and proud to help ERGs formally launch, as well as do some trainings on ERG leadership development. We also do trainings on bias and allyship and privilege. Over the last year, we actually facilitated over 30 trainings to our corporate clients with over 2,000 participants, which I'm so proud of, and just really passionate about the work that we do. So my background is in talent acquisition, diversity and inclusion, and leadership development. I'm also an executive coach. And that is a little bit about me. And I hope to learn more about you all. With that being said, I will turn it over to Dr. Tamara.
Hi, everyone. And thank you, Letitia, for that intro. Super excited that you all have joined us, that you've taken time out of your lunch. Shout out to all the people that might be eating, nibbling while we're in this session together. Do what you got to do, get comfortable. We're just happy that you're here with us. I'm Tamara Dias. I serve as Perfeqta's Director of Culture and Partnerships, which is a fancy way of saying internally and externally, I make sure things are running well. Bringing to Perfeqta my background as a diversity, equity, and inclusion educator and leader, nearly 6.5 years of being a chief executive officer of an organization serving about 14,000 constituents. And also really a background in leadership development, helping develop senior leaders to think strategically and to achieve their overall goals and visions for the organizations and companies that they serve. I have the unique blend of having a background in both nonprofit and corporate settings, which I bring to all of my work here, especially in conversations like the one we're about to have today around diversity, equity, and inclusion, HR, limited resources, and really how you keep things moving when circumstances change and situations change. Again, as Letitia highlighted already, I'm an educator at heart, and so none of us want to just talk to you. We want you to engage with us, use the chat, use the Q&A, and let us know when we say something that resonates with you. Let us know when you agree with something. Let us know when you need more information. We are here to share, but also really to connect with you so we can learn more about how to best support organizations like all the ones represented here this afternoon. So happy to be here, and I'll pass it over to Bryce.
Thank you. Thank you. Hey there, folks. My name is Bryce Rowlager, and I am the Director of Business and Brand Development here at Perfeqta. Typically, I've been the first meeting orgs take, and I'm seeing some of our client partners here. Much of my practice includes teaching, writing, and design. Wrote my first book during the pandemic, really excited about that, with particular focus really on race representation and equity. So really my ongoing design research interrogates the complexities of identity formation, systems of value, and the shared vernacular around Black and Brown immigrant culture, really specifically and exclusively through the lens of social impact design. So to our team's sentiment, you could be doing anything else, but you chose to share a moment with us, so we're grateful that you're here.
All right, now that you know the team, you know who we are, we know a little bit about who you are, let's jump into why we are here today. If you're like me, and you are a type A person that loves to know what the objective is, we got you. We're going to give you a map, a roadmap, so you can follow along with us today and you know what to expect. No surprises. We got your back. So first, we have just 60 minutes. So we're going to try to cram as much possible into this time to give you as much information as we can that can be relevant for you in your work. The first thing we're going to do is unpack some key challenges that are being faced by HR teams, specifically those with limited organizational resources. And from that perspective, really want to look at that from, you can be a HR team with limited people resources. So maybe you're an HR team of 1 or an HR team of 2 that is doing everything from recruiting to onboarding to retention initiatives. Or maybe you're an HR team that just has limited resources in terms of budget, capital that you can access. And so you're trying to make things happen, maybe with limited funding to drive the goals that you're setting. So we're going to talk about just some of those challenges that you all might be facing in attendance today. And again, as we're unpacking those, if some of them resonate with you, let us know. Let us know if we're on the right track and if we're hitting home for you and pointing out some of the things you're seeing. The second thing we'll talk about is the importance of collaboration. I think everybody here probably knows that, especially during times where resources might be cut, or even during times of transition, collaboration is essential. And not just in terms of, sharing work, but we'll talk about that when it talks about making those DEI goals come to fruition and come to life. And really what it means to be in alignment and not working in those silos. So HR is over here, DEI is over here, and folks aren't even connecting. We'll talk about really why it's important to kind of bridge that connection and ensure people are on the same page. And then at Perfeqta, we always say that we like to make any training, any conversation we do actionable. So while we can talk and we can give you statistics, we can give you theory, we want you to leave with strategies. When you finish this webinar, what can you take away back to your teams, back to your manager, back to your director or vice president, and say, I learned this strategy and I think it's something we can implement. Specifically, if you've been following any of our promo around this, you know that today we're going to talk about the pillars of well-being, recruiting, professional development, and workplace flexibility. So we're going to unpack what each of those pillars looks like in the workplace, and then give you some actionable strategies that if you were to leave here off this webinar today, what can you take back and implement or try out or toss around as a potential response to some of the things that you might be seeing. Again, as we're sharing today, invite you to, chat with us in the chat. We'll have opportunities for you to engage with us with some poll questions, and really want you to be able to think about how your role presently, whether you are on the HR side or the DEI side, or maybe you're a senior leader that is trying to support your team, really want you to think about the work you're doing and how the topics and the information shared today are applicable to your unique situation or your unique work setting. And so with that being said, let's jump right in.
Thank you. Thank you. So really what we're seeing, if we're looking at the data from Washington Post, job listings for diversity, equity, and inclusion roles spiked in the summer of 2020. Feels like it was yesterday, quite frankly, if I'm being very honest. And following that, due to layoffs and the economic forecast, listings for DEI roles were down 19% last year, which we'll kind of get more into later on in this topic. And then really we found the small size of many diversity teams, really the median being 3 on a lucky day, if I'm being very honest, means that some of the companies have removed their entire diversity department. I'm curious, team, hearing these stats, what have you seen with some of our client partners or industries at large?
So I think for me, Bryce, I want to point out your point around the statistics we're seeing here around how the DEI roles spiked in the summer of 2020. And I just saw an article this morning, I think it was LinkedIn that came across, and it talked about people who have been hired as chief diversity officers or chief diversity strategists are now without jobs. And they were set up to take these big visions, even now, kind of as we get closer to summer, because I think summer 2020, George Floyd, we're at kind of at that 3-year mark of companies that set out with these strategic plans and these DEI mission statements and said, we're going to transform company culture. And now they're like, just kidding, we don't have any money. We don't really have time for DEI goals anymore. And so you're seeing not just the shift away from DEI strategy and how do we reach DEI goals, but you're also seeing people who do this work and are passionate about it losing their jobs and not being able to see the work through. So I know that's what I'm seeing, just even in terms of like LinkedIn within my networks, and specifically a lot of Black and brown leaders who do DEI work are being laid off and are the first to be laid off in their companies.
Yeah, that's a really good call out. Letitia?
Yeah. I agree with everything that you all have been sharing. And the other thing I would say is that even if companies are hiring heads of diversity and we're seeing those roles being cut, as you mentioned, Tamara, they still are being under-resourced and understaffed. We've talked to several DEI leaders over the last year that have even come into organizations and, were promised that they would be able to build a team, and then the goalposts just continue to get pushed out and out and out. But then in terms of the expectations, being asked to create a strategic plan in a month, right? Being asked to pretty much revamp a company culture in a quarter without having the proper resources was just a really unreasonable ask. And so not only are we seeing companies cutting these roles, cutting teams, cutting resources, it also seems that the expectations themselves are still quite there. We also see that normally people, talent, diversity teams are understaffed and under-resourced, but they are one of the only functions, especially leadership functions, that are really required to serve every single one of the employees in the organization. And so the math is really not adding up. And also, there is such a strong business case for diversity. Companies that are more diverse and inclusive are more innovative, they make more money, the cash flow is higher. It is really disheartening to see companies underinvest in DEI when it is when it is statistically proven that companies that are more diverse, that are more inclusive, do actually perform better in the market.
That's great. That's great. From a 10,000 view perspective, a common theme with many of our client partners in Q1 has been a drastic decrease in funding power, an aggressive halt in implementing, most not by their own admission, quite frankly, which is dangerous because we see a great deal of turnover. The industries we are adjacent to, on the other hand, if I can be honest, if we're looking at the data, the numbers haven't moved much in tech in particular through a DEI lens. So we're still struggling to see, a true diverse group of people inside of orgs. When they come in, they forget the E&I, the equity and inclusion part. And so they're left flailing about trying to find comfort really in this space, and often they can't find their way and they leave. And so it's the ongoing cycle we're seeing where we bottleneck at the recruit and hire component. You get them, but you haven't created an environment and space for those folks. What is working, I will say, as we found, is that overall people leaders are still very receptive to DEI, but the catch is depth of work and the pace really leading into summer. So I really appreciate those.
And I also want to call out some of the comments that we're seeing in the chat as well. So you all keep those comments coming. Thank you for sharing. I do just want to shout out a couple of things that I'm seeing here. And Tamara and Bryce, feel free to chime in as well. So Sybil said DEI, but no actionable plans, only words, right? And, how can we make sure that our organizations are not doing that performative diversity thing? Because that is actually more harmful really than doing nothing at all. Molly said that they have a DEI committee and their company has over 4,000 employees. So it's great to hear that there is an actual governance structure, right? And, I'm going to chat a little bit here about the relationship between HR and DE&I, but I do want to emphasize the importance of an organization having a strong governance structure, even beyond just HR and DEI, such as a committee, a council, employee resource groups. So that's great. Aaron also mentioned that even though things have been reduced, the company's commitment is still really strong, and that is proud to hear, as Redfin is one of our partners. And so thank you. Y'all keep those comments coming. Tamara and Bryce, was there anything y'all wanted to add before I start speaking about this?
I think you said it. Thank you for sharing that comment that mentioned the committee, because I think one of the things that we've seen in our client partners that are successful is having a group of people working towards this and not just one singular individual who is tasked with kind of moving everything DEI related forward. And, we've been fortunate at Perfeqta to have client partners where we work with them to create kind of their DEI council and build up their structure so that there is kind of shared governance and shared responsibility. So kudos to that company for, valuing that, especially now, and for empowering those individuals to drive DEI forward.
Yeah, I'll just say, I want to make sure I'm saying your name right. Is it Sybil or Sybil Carter Love? DEI, but no actionable plans, only words. And I'll get a bit into this later on when we speak about recruiting in particular, but it really does come down to outcomes and really a mindset around DEI. An engineer always recognizes that there are quarters to ship out a new technology. It's an ever-changing process. Unfortunately, DEI doesn't get that type of love. The function is very, very in alignment with that. We are always going to ship. We're always going to ship. And so I'll speak a little bit about that, but you are absolutely on the money. Outcomes really is that key word for me.
Thanks, y'all. And again, keep those comments coming. We love hearing from you all. Great. So now I'm going to talk a little bit about the relationship between human resources and DE&I. A lot of HR teams are changing their titles to, people, talent, culture. Those are all pretty adjacent. And then again, with DE&I. But I really just want to hone in on the fact that managers, especially those middle managers, are struggling to build a hybrid workplace. So again, through this pandemic, we have had to really reshift and rethink how we work together and how we approach our work, especially in a remote or hybrid environment, making sure that we're trying to keep employee engagement high, right? Especially when working remotely. In addition to balancing employee expectations, employees are, especially now in 2023 and beyond, are really wanting to find purpose in their careers. They're no longer just looking at work as work, but really wanting to find meaningful careers. Flexibility is extremely important. Being able to work on a flex schedule, as we are taking on more responsibilities at home. And again, just shifting our responsibilities around because of the pandemic. And then career opportunities with performance pressure from senior leaders as well. So there is still a lot of pressure to perform. Something that we say a lot is companies still like to operate BAU, business as usual, no matter what's happening in the world. And there is so much that is actually going on around us. There's also hiring freezes as HR is cleaning up their tech stack. So this includes those applicant tracking systems, those systems that companies actually use to post those job requisitions, to review and manage those applications. There's also customer relationship management tools that kind of really helps us to manage our relationships with customers, sourcing platforms, email finders, interview schedulers, video interviewing platforms, and referral programs. So those are just some of the few kind of new resources that HR teams are having to really consider and look at. Every time we're in a conversation with a leader of HR, a leader of talent at an organization, they're always telling me about how they're having to look at some new system, whether that be for employee engagement, they might be switching an ATS, they might be looking into resources to even measure those diversity and inclusion analytics. So there is a lot of expectations around finding ways to work more, focus more on those tech tools, but also keep the business and the function running itself. I want to call out this quote here by the Kaleidoscope Group, and they said there has always been a close relationship between HR and DEI companies. Almost all of HR duties relate in some form or fashion to DE&I. And this is why DE&I companies are the best partner for HR departments. You really see DE&I and HR working hand in hand. But one thing that I will say is that due to some of the changes that we've been seeing in restructuring, we've been seeing at companies, going back to those stats that we mentioned earlier, when companies are under investing in DE&I or they're reducing the headcount on their DE&I teams, that's putting more pressure and weight on HR. And so the question then becomes, how can HR continue to work with DE&I to really fulfill those outcomes, even if those resources are being limited? And again, that's something that we're going to cover in our next few minutes together. But I'll have a question for you all. And this is actually a poll question. So the question is, do you feel like your HR and DEI department are well aligned in their goals? Do you feel like they're well aligned in their goals? It is so important for those two groups to be operating in alignment. And sometimes they operate in silos. And as those responses are coming through, we're seeing more no and sometimes than yes.
To be expected.
Mm-hmm. And we'll give it a few more seconds. If you haven't answered the poll, definitely answer.
Mark, you are hilarious.
All right, we got most of you all answering. So it looks like between no and sometimes takes the cake. So 44% said sometimes, 41% said no, and then only 15% said yes. For those of you that said yes, y'all got to drop some tips in here before we leave today on what you all are seeing your companies do well, because that's great to hear. But it is not surprising that about 85, 86% of us said no or sometimes. There is a big opportunity for HR and DEI to really get aligned and work together because of what we are seeing in the industry. And this is actually going to lead us great into what we're going to be discussing next.
All right, so getting into our first pillar that we mentioned we were going to discuss today is well-being. And so well-being is simply defined as focusing on the state of employees' mental and physical health, resulting from dynamics within and sometimes outside the workplace. So I'll say that again, and it's on the screen. Focusing on the state of employees' mental and physical health, resulting from dynamics within and sometimes outside of the workplace. So knowing what well-being encompasses, I'm curious, go ahead and drop in the chat for me. If you had to score, your organization's well-being or how they approach to well-being, with 1 being terrible and 5 being absolutely amazing, I couldn't have dreamt of a program as amazing when it comes to well-being, how would you rate your current organization? Go ahead and drop that in the chat. A 3.5, okay, in the middle. So 3s are good, okay. Opportunity for growth. I'm loving the decimals here. Thanks for not putting fractions. Fractions were not my strong suit in elementary school. I was very glad when we moved past that unit. So thank you for the decimal points. Okay, 2s. Local area would be a 4, national would be a 1. Okay. And I love that nuance as well. For some of you all that might be working with a global organization or a national organization, knowing that maybe your local office might function a little bit differently than, what the global or national office puts into place. It's good to have that. All right, so we're seeing on average, I think 3-ish, which tells me that well-being is at least discussed or is somewhat of a priority where you are, but there is opportunity for growth and opportunity just to expand, what they're offering and how they're navigating this. What's important to me is that in a recent survey of business leaders, so people who are responsible for kind of taking the business forward, handling the vision, setting the strategic goals, they identified well-being remaining as one of the unresolved priorities, which tells me that it is a priority, but it's something that they have yet to figure out how to tackle and how to approach. I listened to a podcast last year from Culture Amp. They're an organization that has an app, like an app that supports organizations in, revamping their culture. And they had a CEO on there. And she said one of the best things she learned was that when she stopped seeing her team as just employees and started seeing them as whole people, it shifted her entire approach to how she led and supervised others. And she said, because when she was thinking about benefits or thinking about, how do we create opportunities for engagement? How do we let you know we care about you? How do we show that you're valuable as an employee? She was only thinking professional development, stipends, send them to a workshop, go to a conference, here's a book. we'll bring coffee to the office. You got to be here to drink it though. Like that kind of thing. But when she said, I saw them as whole people who had families, who had dogs, who had cats, who liked to run, who liked to sleep in on Saturdays, who loved to go shop at Target. Like when she saw them as full human beings, it completely changed her approach to well-being, and really shifted how she approached supporting her team. And so from my perspective, just hearing that, I know that if more leaders, managers, supervisors took that perspective, I think it would change the shift in how people approach well-being in the workplace. And so as you think about suggestions for how DEI and HR can kind of work together when it comes to creating an environment that says we value well-being, we think it's a priority. The first thing that we suggest here is ensuring that performance reviews are being used as opportunities to maximize employees' work and their contributions. And I think with this, we want to underscore the importance of performance reviews, not just focusing on areas of opportunity or how you need to grow or the new class you need to take, but really opportunities to highlight and let that person shine and brag about all the things that they're doing. How are you giving them the opportunity to kind of demonstrate, here's my brag sheet for all the ways that I've contributed to the organization, and giving them the opportunity to just highlight the things that as a manager or supervisor, you may have forgotten or may not have noticed throughout the year, especially because I don't know about you, but performance reviews can be kind of nerve-wracking sometimes. I remember being in performance reviews and being so nervous about the review that I don't even know how to talk about myself. I don't know what to say. And so it helps when I have a manager that is aware and can say, how do I center you and highlight your celebrations and the things that you've done? The second we recommend here, if you're virtual or remote, hosting a virtual gathering just for employees to connect across departments and build relationships. I can't emphasize here the importance of just connection. I think in leadership, sometimes it can be easy to always feel like there has to be like a strategy outcome. Like if I give you time to network, then you got to show me that networking led to an increased performance across your department. Sometimes people just need to meet other people and know, who am I working with? Who do I have around me? Oh my gosh, I didn't know that Brittany in marketing and I lived across the street from each other. Didn't know that because I never get to talk to her or I never get to interact with her. Valuing well-being is understanding that relationships are critical to overall just positive engagement and positive well-being in the workplace. And then the last one we recommend is, if you don't have one, implementing a mental health day policy, which allows employees to take a day for their mental wellness. I know some organizations might call this a wellness day. A friend of mine works for a global company and they just had their wellness day on Friday. And so she was able to take a break from the work, kind of decompress and not feel guilty about it because everybody was on a mental health day. So it wasn't like I'm the only one. It was a company-wide, there's no meetings, take your time, take what you need. Maggie, in the chat, what would be some ways that a manager can let the employee shine or be recognized for their work? Letitia and Bryce, feel free to chime in. But one thing that I always say helps when you're asking them, and I think really just being intentional about the questions that you ask, if it's not a part of your formal performance review, I think as a manager, asking them, what did you feel most proud about since the last time we talked or the last time that we met? What brought you the most joy that you worked on? What relationships have you built that maybe you felt were essential to just your overall engagement here that you feel you want to continue moving forward? I think asking those specific questions and not specifically saying like, how did you reach the business objective that we set? That's fine. But I think when you ask, what brought you joy in accomplishing? What do you feel most proud about? Even asking them, where do you think we should start when it comes to talking about all the things you accomplished over the past quarter or year? Giving them kind of that opportunity to kind of fill that in is a great way. But Bryce, Letitia, feel free to chime in here as well.
Yeah, I'll tap in here. I echo that sentiment. I think sometimes we can really blow up DEI work to be something bigger than what it needs to be. Really at this level, we're not necessarily considering the monolith of capitalism right now. We're trying to give the person the humanity to speak upon what they're thinking. We might be so biased in our observations and perceptions, we've basically suffocated the opportunity going back to Tamara's example of the leader at Culture Amp, to really learn. I mean, that's really what this is. And so there's a bit of a back and forth where we're just trying to provide a little bit of that humanity before we start getting into performance and outcomes from a business sense.
I think you both covered it well. Bryce, I can hone in on what you just said. Sometimes with DE&I work, we do overcomplicate it, right? And then it becomes this thing that we just talk about that exists over here. And so I really appreciate, Tamara, your points around, really just building a culture and environment that does really promote emotional and psychological safety and well-being. So thank you.
Yeah, thanks to you both. I mean, I think simply put, you're dealing with humans, so treat them as people first. Humanity before business strategy, I think, will always set you up for success.
And now from a place from recruiting, really for us, improving diversity hiring efforts is really a sensitive and time-consuming process that can be difficult to oversee. We see this often. That's why a slowdown is, again, it's not by everyone's own admission, but we're not going to waste the opportunity to focus on creating better and more objective hiring processes. Really just addressing biases and lived experiences through that. A new Deloitte study found leaders to be completely overwhelmed by the changes they need to make to effectively meet this moment in 2023. Again, we echo that. I would say that at the second week of January, it was pretty hard for our client partners and our adjacent peers. Really for us, the thing that we want to make sure is that, when focusing on these things, we just suggest a few, evaluate the talent boards being utilized and ensure they're reaching diverse audiences. Again, try not to overthink this. If we were thinking like an engineer, how does that engineer really interact with a prospect client? They ask questions, they understand really where those complexities lie, and they go to those audiences. Check your job descriptions on language that's exclusionary of candidates with disabilities, both seen, unseen. Again, we could even zoom out. There are things like culture fit, which is probably one of the biggest elephants in the room. Don't be very careful in how you're presenting some of these micro doses of information. And then, of course, leveraging diverse internal employees who can share their stories and experiences with candidates. Really, for me, what the challenge here we found at Perfeqta, working with certain orgs, is that getting this right really requires extraordinary leadership, not just overt edicts. And so typically it starts with them going into every challenge curious. Any staff member can really do that and asking the question, why is this happening? Let's work together on this. I commit my resources, my power, my authority to make change, but I need to know what that right thing is, which we always hear. I don't know where to start. What is the right thing? And it's so based upon fear. Again, let's zoom out. What is the right thing? I don't think you know. I don't think I know, but I think together and with some outside help, if and when that makes sense, we'll figure out what that is for the organization. And my only commitment is to take action when it's time to take action. And again, under the hood, in practice, DEI work is very ongoing, sequential journey of identifying when inequalities exist. Back to your point, Charlene, fixing them and progressing as an organization and create and creating a company that people love to work in. And so another little tidbit, if we're looking at the data, for example, making the workforce gender diverse would increase the GDP by 26%, which I found to be extremely fascinating. I think we're always careful about making the business case. We can acknowledge the function of business, but again, that human first. But it's always nice to kind of dangle that in front of some people's faces, like, hey, 26% increase in GDP is not bad if we make the workforce more gender diverse.
Thanks, Bryce. Y'all keep those comments coming as well. And Sybil mentioned that it's so important to have the emotional intelligence when it comes to employees and teams, which is really, really vital. On the topic of professional development, people do need to be developed to build emotional intelligence, to build those people skills, to build those managerial skills, because what we're seeing right now in the industry is that there is a widening managerial skills gap. We talked to several companies, and even leaders have told us that they recognize that internal mobility and advancement and promotion of diverse talent specifically is a weak point that they are trying to work through. We're seeing where folks are leaving organizations to really grow into the leaders they want to become. So with that being said, I really want to emphasize here that professional development will help employees improve and grow and excel beyond their current job performance, and it will prepare them for a future career path. We're seeing that when companies do lack that professional development piece, that employees are having to take on the onus of developing themselves or finding external resources. So wanted to provide some suggestions here on what organizations can do to at least do a low lift when it comes to professional development. The first one here is creating a mentoring program. We need access to social capital. We need access to leadership. We also need that visibility to grow in our careers. And so creating a mentorship program, it is a great way to provide really that access from the mid-level employees to senior leaders. Can also provide an opportunity for some reverse mentorship to happen. The next one here is to partner with the local nonprofit for a lunch and learn on a topic that aligns with your DE&I goals. Just getting folks in the room to learn about ways in which they can support their local community, support a cause that your organization cares about. That is a great way to make sure that people are engaged and invested in the work. The next one here is leveraging ERGs to host programming that reflects the diversity of the program and highlighting those heritage months. So there's Women's History Month that is in March. There is Latinx Month, Black History Month, of course, which we are currently in. There's also Pride Month that's coming up this summer. Being able to host programming that really creates and builds an awareness of these communities will also build cultural competence across different employees, across different levels, and will also help managers have a better understanding of the communities of the folks that their teams may identify with or belong to. And then I really want to point out this last one here. Of course, when you are evolving DE&I at your company, there's going to be some pushback. So HR must equip managers specifically with tools and strategies to engage those resistant employees and address that pushback early before it does evolve to DEI resistance. Expect for the resistance to come, expect for employees to ask, why are we doing this? Why is it important? And it's so necessary for companies to make sure that managers are able to actually have effective conversations with their teams when those types of conversations come up.
Awesome. Thank you for that, Letitia. So getting into our last pillar is workplace flexibility. And in thinking about this, I want to share a couple of statistics with you from a company called Zenefits. And Zenefits is just a platform where companies can manage benefits for their employees, HR policies, and things like that. And in their study, they found that 73% of employees said that workplace flexibility increases their overall satisfaction. And 78% said that when they're given workplace flexibility, they're more productive in the work that they do. However, only just 50% of employees reported that they actually have a policy at work that enables them to have workplace flexibility. And 30% said that they are already planning to leave their current employer based on lack of workplace flexibility. So what that tells me is that there's a huge gap between people who the employees valuing and needing workplace flexibility and employers actually offering it. And we've seen an increase in workplace flexibility options since the pandemic. But now what you're seeing is feeling like people are post-pandemic, employers are now requiring people to come back in person. However, if we know that that workplace flexibility leads to that increased productivity, leads to increased satisfaction, it really is going to be in leadership and employers' favor to consider opportunities where they can offer flexibility. And it doesn't necessarily mean becoming a fully remote workplace. There's other ways that you can approach workplace flexibility. And really looking at that, thinking about how you can, again, we're talking about the whole human. So seeing them not just people who show up from 9 to 5, but knowing that it's a group of humans who have families, who have responsibilities, who have lives and obligations outside of work. Workplace flexibility understands that and says, how do we meet that by offering flexibility in how we approach the idea of working? And so some recommendations we have is that for in-person places, maybe trying to offer 1 or 2 days a week to work from home. So it doesn't mean that you got to shift to 100% remote work. Everybody can, take their trip to Canada, Puerto Rico, and the Bahamas and work. It means that maybe you just say, everybody on the calendar, pick which day you're going to take off this week and work from home, giving them flexibility. So maybe if they, need to have a doctor's appointment or their babysitter gets sick and they need, to stay home, there's opportunities there without feeling like they have to come into the office. The second is really just allowing flexible hours to get work done. A lot of employers have shifted away from the idea of you have to be working between the hours of 9 and 5. One, because realizing that some people may just need flexibility. And if the work product is still there and they're still meeting requirements, doesn't matter if they did the work at 7 o'clock versus 2 p.m. if the end goal was still met. So there's also opportunity there to say, maybe we shift what working hours looks like to better adapt to the needs of the people we serve. And then the last one, which I think is really great, especially when you're thinking about layoffs and companies with budget cuts, considering implementing job sharing opportunities where 2 employees can collaborate on a task or a project. So what that means is if, we're talking about HR and DEI coming together, if there's a goal here to kind of launch or revamp employee resource groups, maybe it's not just the DEI committee that's responsible for it, but they're partnering with human resources to share the tasks. So when we see job sharing, it takes the load off of one person to feel like I got to tackle this all by myself. And it just increases collaboration. So you have more of that relationship building as well. We're going to launch another poll for you all as we move into kind of like our wrap up and thinking about what we've shared here today and looking at the 4 pillars: well-being, recruiting, professional development, and workplace flexibility. We're going to ask you to think about, based on where your organization is now, which of these is the biggest opportunity? So we're not going to say biggest weakness. We're going to say, where is the area for opportunity? Where can your organization right now tap into? Despite everything going on, where can you focus right now to leverage that relationship, leverage that collaboration to still move DE&I forward? We'll give you all a few seconds to answer.
And while you're doing that, it wouldn't hurt to clarify what you all mean authentically by professional development. Maybe it's a little different for everybody. So if you wanted, because I'm seeing a huge gap there with professional development. If you want to go further in, we always love to know some more details.
We'll give you all a couple more seconds if you haven't responded. All right, so we are seeing recruiting and professional development as the top 2 here. And as Bryce said, we would love to know kind of when you say professional development, give us a note to what that means. If it's a training, workshop, program, what do you mean in terms of that? But yeah, I think that when we're talking about each of these, and hopefully the strategies today gave you some insight into where you can start, I think just seeing it as an opportunity rather than kind of a point of frustration is really going to help move things forward and hopefully give you some inspiration to new ideas and new practices you can try. Letitia and Bryce, if y'all have anything to add, feel free to jump in if I forgot anything or if you just want to underscore anything.
Yeah, I'm sorry, I sound like a parakeet. I'm going to repeat myself a bit. To echo that, a really great place to start is once you understand, okay, it's recruiting, it's professional development. It's really just important to start asking the question, why is this happening? Let's work together on this and finding a way to really commit resources. I'm seeing a few questions talking about budgets, but we have to find a way for folks to share their authority to make change and find out what the right thing is. And unfortunately, one person won't figure that out. And it's really important to include certain stakeholders, certain peers. And so I just wanted to echo that.
Awesome point. Thank you for sharing that, Bryce. And thank you all for sharing in the chat and for responding to our poll.
So along with what you guys are giving, a lot of information, I'm loving it. Just trying to read off to some of our key findings here, but our key takeaways for us, it is essential for HR and DEI goals to be in alignment, especially when resources are limited. Again, sometimes they're really not the same thing. There's a conversation of HR reporting directly to DEI, and there are other subset conversations around that. But even so, there are certain C-suite folks who are not involved in the HR conversations. That needs to change as well. And just because you're not hiring in 2023, it does not mean diversity has no place. If we're looking at the data provided by organizations, IT organizations like Lenovo, 67% of employees would be less likely to quit if their company improved its diversity practices. That's a clear majority. You really can't argue with those numbers, like the great theologian Jay-Z said. And not to mention, I believe 48% of Gen Z are non-white. That's the most ethnically diverse generation in human history so far. I mean, the ship is coming and there's no way around it. So, and not to mention, just zooming out again, people's standards are increasing. So it's not just that they want places to be diverse, they want workplaces that enable flexibility, a genuine positive place for everyone, and is inclusive. They don't want the apolitical route of doing things, from the 60s to the early 90s. That ship's gone. Vulnerability, honesty, accountability, iterative. Personally, if I can be personal, I'd like to see DEI integrated in everything organizations are doing. A second nature, almost thinking about it day to day, to all customer facing outcomes from product to culture. And again, really the first step is really asking the question, why is this happening? And really going from there. Team, did you have anything to add? Heavy on embedding, come on.
I think you summarized it perfectly.
Great. Well, this has been an excellent conversation. Thank you all so much. Don't leave just yet, because we do have some time for Q&A as we wrap up. We have 7 minutes left. So what we're going to do now is to just go through some questions that you all may have before you leave. I'm also going to drop a couple of resources here in the chat. So it sounds like we all left with a collective understanding of the fact that even if DEI has limited resources, that there are still so many other ways to embed it across different functions and areas within your organization. Really take the time to process and think about the 4 pillars that we shared today. It seems like you all have identified those areas that your company can improve on, and want you all to make sure you follow us, engage with us on LinkedIn, add us on LinkedIn. We also have a Perfeqta LinkedIn newsletter. I think one of you all also mentioned that your company should be doing some ongoing learnings. And so at Perfeqta, this is what we do. So if you enjoyed this and you want us to do something specifically for your company or community, don't hesitate to reach out to us. I dropped our email here in the chat as well. So we're all going to participate in answering some questions, and we're going to be back here in a month doing this again on another topic. So I am going to start with this question here from an anonymous attendee. So thank you for your question. And I'll just read it out loud. During the last 2 years, many companies created Black hiring strategies, but some end up with structural racism with lower pay and lower job levels for the people hired through these special recruiting programs versus people with the same background applying directly. How do you coach the DEI and ERG advocates to stop recommending recruiting programs with good intentions, but outcomes introducing structural inequity for pay and job level? Thank you for that question. I'll kick it off by saying that that is extremely inequitable, and it seems like you are pretty aware that it is. We do recommend for companies that are that do have inequities, pay gaps, is to do a pay equity audit. So definitely create and push for a business case for a company to do a pay equity audit. And in that pay equity audit, that will allow a company to really kind of analyze those gaps and look at the salary for all employees, be able to really drill down into the data and look at how are women employees being paid to, are women and non-binary being paid compared to men, right? How is our BIPOC community being paid compared to white people within the organization, and so on and so forth. So first thing that I would recommend specifically here is to really push for a pay equity audit if possible. But in terms of to not recommend those recruiting programs, it sounds like there is a pretty impactful issue that's happening at the top that does need to be addressed within the leadership team. So I don't know if you've had specific one-on-one, maybe private conversations with an HR, someone in leading this partnership, someone in HR, but I would definitely start there. Tamara or Bryce, do you want to add on to that?
I was going to say pay equity audit, so you already said it. And then I would also say that this is probably telling me that there's a gap between HR function in terms of recruiting as well as DEI goals and strategy. Because if the goal is we're going to go out here and diversify and bring these candidates on, but pay is inequity and is inequitable and we don't have proper just function when it comes to what we're offering our teams, then I definitely think, we see the case here for bridging the gap between those two. And we've worked, with some client partners on evaluating kind of how they approach pay equity. And I would even suggest one of the things that we've also done is how jobs are shared. So this is inclusive job descriptions, inclusive job hiring practices, which includes transparency around salaries and what is being offered to clear up kind of any gray areas or things that pop up. Because, historically, we know that candidates of color and women are less likely to actually receive the pay that they should based on their qualifications.
Thanks, Tamara. And I also, just for time, want to move on to another question so we can get at least maybe 1 to 2 more in. Danny asked a question around, can you speak to a small org's needs where we do not have clearly defined HR and DEI roles? First thing I would say is to call us at Perfeqta, send us an email. Would love to hear more about that. But I would encourage you to start with our DEI framework. Make sure that you do build a governance structure, whether that's you, whether that is someone leading HR. If your company is too small, get a small group of employees together that are passionate about this work, and even create a DEI committee, that does have the eyes and ears of leadership. But if you take a look at our framework, this is something we have provided to all of our client partners, but it really will allow you to assess your current state of DEI maturity. So what are we doing well? Maybe what are we not doing well? And then also take a look at, within those 5 stages, the stage you would like to grow to within the next 2 to 3 years. And then that's going to give you a really good understanding of what you can do to move up in your maturity. But there are things that you can do to start small. I'll turn it over to Tamara or Bryce if you want to add anything else to that.
Yeah, sorry guys, I'm always big on zooming out. This is a really, really great question. Again, under the hood, the idea is really to understand what is the ongoing sequential journey of identifying the inequalities that we're dealing with as an org, regardless of size, coming up with a way to, quite frankly, have an outcome and fix it, and then progressing as an organization from there, and is extremely iterative. But at a high level, I just kind of always like things to be a little bit palatable. Those are really the three ways in which we always recommend for you to be considering.
There's also training, so, kind of bringing in speakers to speak on topics as well, even just having conversations with employees on what they would like to see the company do. You can get a lot of, in terms of where you need to go, you can get a lot of insights from the employees that the work is going to impact. So also start there, start asking questions instead of making decisions, and then provide those recommendations to leadership. We're going to take one more question, and this is for Dr. Tamara. Which executive development opportunities do you recommend for DE&I teams?
Thanks for the question. And I think for me, as someone who has been on a team and someone who has led multiple teams, I always say at the core of everything, you have to start with self-awareness. And so at Perfeqta, we've done a lot of workshops around implicit and explicit bias, understanding kind of your own personal experiences, how you show up in the workplace, as well as how it impacts your interactions with people who are like you and those who are different. We've also done workshops just around understanding different dimensions of diversity and the isms that come within these dimensions of diversity. So sexism, racism, ageism, ableism, how they all show up in terms of impacting how teams work together, as well as how leaders lead. And so those are kind of like where I would start, because I find that oftentimes companies or organizations will focus on DEI strategy, like let's just reach for this big goal, but they haven't done the foundational work, where individuals have to be, self-aware and demonstrate some kind of readiness towards these initiatives moving forward. So those would probably be my starting foundations, and what we've seen work really well with our client partners that we've done trainings like that with at Perfeqta.
Thank you. Well, y'all, this was great. Thank you all for staying for the full hour. Really appreciate your commentary, your questions. If you do have any questions, you have our email. We're on LinkedIn, so shoot us a LinkedIn request, message us on LinkedIn. I know that we didn't get a chance to get to all of the questions today, but you all know how to find us. Be on the lookout for more emails and more resources coming your way. But I really just want to say thank you for being here, for spending time with us over here at Perfeqta. As you all can see, we're passionate about this work. We're also good at what we do too, just kind of tooting our horn. And so if there are opportunities for us to support your organizations, don't hesitate to reach out. Before I close out, Tamara or Bryce, is there anything that you all wanted to add in?
Not a whole lot for me, just I hope you all feel inspired and encouraged to move forward in the work you're doing. It may be hard, we understand, but just hang in there. I know all of y'all are doing a great job. It's demonstrated in your effort and showing up here today. So thank you for being here.
Yep, I just echo the same thing. Really, again, when approaching any of your maturity models at your organization, just start with curiosity and humanity, and from there you will find a way to create some outcomes that make sense.
Wonderful. Thanks, y'all. Have a great rest of your day and a great rest of your week. Take care.